So the next presentation we have, and this is a topic that's actually near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to welcome up to the stage Oscar from MindTickle and Julie from Russell Investments. Clicker? Yeah, there you go.
Thanks very much. So one of the things that I think everyone's been hearing over the last couple of days, especially Julie and I, is the empowered and enabled customer is really only possible if we empower and enable our colleagues and our customer-facing reps the same. So today we're trying to take a little bit of a different tack to what we've traditionally been talking about here, and we're going to be talking about taking our customer experience strategy all the way through to execution across the front line. And I think we had a bit of a sports analogy up on the screen before. And
we love sports analogies. I know nothing about sports, but I know how to use sports analogies because we're in finance, so it's all good.
So when Julie and I were first talking, when we first signed Russell as a customer, she was talking about this idea of teams practicing 40 hours a week and how important practicing is and how you should be taking that into your sales and service scenarios. So Julie, do you want to maybe fill in the audience in a bit more about that story?
Sure. I feel like our sales team would be really proud that I'm using a sports analogy. The only sport I know is hockey because I'm Canadian, so bear with me as I stumble through these analogies. So the analogy, and I'm sure some of you have probably heard this already, is that professional sports team practice over 40 hours a week. Right, so they're really about making sure that their skills are honed very, very, very well, that they're continuously improving, that the best players are the ones who are usually the most coachable. And so we asked our sales team, like, how many of you dedicate 40 hours a week to practicing your skill and practicing on your job? No one raised their hand, because 40 hours a week seems like an insane amount of time. And so we're not expecting 40 hours a week, but we did want to change that mindset that somehow training and improvement and continuous learning is an additive and an extra thing you have to do and not actually as valuable as the job itself. So we wanted a paradigm shift to occur on our client-facing teams where they felt like training itself is just as important as playtime, and that practice is just as important as the actual game.
And so maybe to sort of give you guys an idea about what MindTickle does, because it is a very interesting name.
We love this. We love this.
And what Julie does as a sales enablement professional, we thought we'd kind of spin the analogy a little bit and go with a little bit of a different one. So,
oh, this is a much more comfortable field for me. Okay, here we go. So I'm not sure how many of you have watched this show on Netflix called Nailed It. Has anyone seen Nailed It? Yes. Yes, okay, so there's some people who've watched this. It does get repetitive after a while, but essentially the premise of the show is that you have this beautiful goal, like a beautiful cake that you're supposed to be designing, and then you have 3 amateur chefs. They know how to cook. They're not professional bakers, so they have to make as close to the cake as possible by the end of the show. And no matter what happens at the end of the show, they're like, nailed it, and they really have not nailed it at all. And so, yeah.
Can get kind of scary. Who's had this happen to them? Just a quick show of hands. Whether it be in a sales, service, customer experience scenario where you've got this idea about the way something should look, and then it comes out on the other end and you just go,
yeah, that's not it. So I think that the best analogy I can think of, because sales enablement is still a relatively new field within finance. It's definitely been more prevalent in the tech industry, but for finance it's been relatively new. So at Russell Investments, sales enablement has really been around for about 4 years, but over the last year, we really tried to transform it as something that's really tangible and action-oriented. And so I always think about, building a sales strategy. Okay, so you take all these components. You take the components from the business development team and the sales team and the client, voice of the client, the marketing team, the consulting team, the investment division, and you're building this beautiful, idealistic strategy. And you're like, okay, I think I got like some of the ingredients. I'm pretty sure I can figure out the recipe because I know what it looks like. I know what the future state is supposed to look like. So I'm just going to go. And so we're just going to execute. And then later on, we look back and we're like, oh, that's the experience was a little bit lacking, to say the least. So our job, my job on the team for North America is to try to make sure that the experience is as close to the desired strategy as possible. So that involves the right ingredients, very specific, concise recipes, very accurate instructions, training the people involved in conducting the experience to make sure that they have the knowledge and the skill set and the execution capable of doing it, and then providing them with the feedback to say, I know that you think it looks like that, but it really doesn't, and here's why. So our job is to minimize that gap as much as possible.
And so sort of thinking about this, taking that idealistic strategy right through to the experience, it might not necessarily be the experience we want coming out on the other end. We're trying to understand, where does this breakdown happen? And we can only understand that if we have the right insight. So I think Julie was at an offsite recently with her sales team, and she had a little bit of a experience sort of come to Jesus moment in herself.
Yeah. It was definitely a come to Jesus moment. I'll give a good example first, and then I'll tell you the brutal example that was very sobering and that they'd probably be embarrassed that I'm sharing. But the good example was that we tend to launch a lot of services and products right within our industry. We love proliferate product design, and so usually when we launch a new product, it takes like 6 months before the sales team is really like, okay, I think I can start talking about it. I think I have the confidence. I think I know enough to just talk about it a little bit. And so we recently launched a new product in our Canadian retail division, and we launched it at the same time as a very robust training series with MindTickle. And so we did anything from virtual testing to just videos to integrated quizzing throughout like a 3-week period, to pitch back videos, to one-on-one coaching. We did it all. And we got our first substantial sale into the product really early, and then we got a series of sales afterwards. So that is an indication and an insight to me that the training is speeding up the process of execution, but speeding it up at a level where the skills are really high. So that's a really good part of how we're fixing that breakdown that usually occurs. The other one that's not as happy is that at a couple months ago, we had our US national sales trainings that my team leads. And we decided to do an exercise where everyone broke down into teams. So there was marketing people, not just sales people, there was business development people, there were sales-oriented people, there was all the client-facing individuals and non-client-facing individuals in a room. So we mixed them all up, and they were sitting in tables kind of like this. And we said, talk about 3 challenges that you think is really impactful to the organization between now and the end of the year. And then spend another half an hour talking about what are the 3 solutions that you can apply to these challenges. So the challenges were somewhat similar. The solutions were even more similar, because 90% of the solutions were, we need more training. We need more training on this, we need more training on this, we need more training on this. And then we did a poll after, and it still boggles my mind that they didn't understand, I guess, the relationship between the exercise and the poll. And the poll was, how many of you, and I'll ask you guys the same question. So raise your hand, how many of you would spend an hour a day training to become an expert in your field? Liars. No, I'm kidding. So we asked this question. No one raised their hand. So it was like 150 people in the room. Not one person raised their hand, except for our head of training, which I was like, well, you don't count. And then we said, how many of you would spend 30 minutes a day training? So how many of you would spend 30 minutes? Okay, yeah. And then so no one raised their hand. And then we said, how many of you would spend 15 minutes a day? And half the room at this point raised their hand. And that was depressing. So I said, does no one realize the irony of the situation? You just said that the biggest challenges that we can hope to fix between now and the end of the year has to do with training. Yet you are not willing to dedicate even 15 minutes a day to train. And part of it was my fault, because I don't think we did a very good job of defining what is training. They're like, well, is reading a Wall Street Journal article training? No. It has to do with improving and becoming an expert within your field. So some of them listen to podcasts, and some of them read newspaper clipping and subscribe to certain journals, and that's fine. But it was just very interesting that the top 20% of salespeople, they're the ones who are like, yeah, I'll do like 15 minutes, I'll do half an hour, and then the 80% just like hunkers down, doesn't want to raise their hand. So that was a pretty big breakdown. However, to their credit, we hadn't launched the series. We hadn't launched all the training series for MindTickle yet. So we launched it the week after the training. So all of the requests for additional training was, oh, we're going to give it to you, and you are going to spend at least 15 minutes a day. But changing that mindset is hard, and it takes time.
No more excuses.
No more excuses. Now we're measuring them every week. Oh yeah, there's a leaderboard. It's all there.
So sort of digging into this a bit more, like what does that next level training experience look like? From taking that strategy right through to the experience, the readiness that sort of goes into place there across knowledge, skills, and insights. What does that really look like?
It's a great question. So I think that in an ideal world, I would feel like it would be a salesperson or any client-facing individual waking up and basically doing every activity with purpose and intent, without questioning whether or not that's impacting their business, without questioning whether or not that's deriving the right outcome. That would be the ideal state. In order to get there, like you said, you need a high level of knowledge that's continuously improving. You need to hone your skills on a continuous basis. You need to execute consistently. And then you have to provide continuous insight and making sure that they know this thing we're asking you to do, this thing we're asking you to learn, will actually improve the outcome at the end of the day. And if you've ever encountered a salesperson, they're very number result oriented. So it's like, this will actually derive a higher cash flow number, a higher sales goal. It will allow you to hit those goals better. And that's the part that I think we're missing. We've missed a lot, is that insight portion. We've asked them to do a lot, but we haven't told them why it's important. So we're fixing that now.
And I think ultimately, the products and services that we provide drive better customer outcomes and therefore better customer experiences.
Yeah.
And so what are some of the lessons that you learned along the way, or mistakes that you might have made, that people in the audience might actually learn from here to, not necessarily make themselves?
I've never made a mistake in my life, so that's not an applicable, no. We made a lot of mistakes. I think we just assumed that when people say, oh, we know how to do this, you don't need to train us for it, we believed them. And we figured, okay, you know your thing. That was not true. And the reason why is because when the people know how to do something, they're gonna tell you they know how to do. When people don't know how to do something, they're probably not gonna tell you they don't know how to do it, because no one wants to appear stupid. So we made a lot of assumptions. We took everyone's anecdotes as generalizations, that everyone on the sales team knew how to do certain things. Everyone on the client-facing side understood what a good client experience meant, and that was not true either. So we had to go back to basics. One of the first things that we did before we even revamped the entire curriculum and learning process was to try to remove as many friction points as possible. So what is painful to a client-facing individual? And something that really seems minor that we fixed early on was reducing the number of internal emails that you get and trying to focus their energy and their attention and their time on outside client-facing activities. So we hit a lot of we tried to quell a lot of little fires, I like to say, as much as possible within the first 8 months. And then we built all of the training from scratch. So I would say that the mistake that we made was we made a lot of assumptions that simply were not true. We also needed to kind of go back to the drawing board, which seems like you're starting off from scratch again and having to rebuild. You think that takes up a lot of time, but because you've learned some lessons, it can actually speed up. And then this is not a pitch for you, but having a partner like MindTickle was immensely helpful in speeding up that process.
And so how are you sort of benchmarking your success? Like, how are you measuring yourself and holding yourself accountable to ultimately driving these better customer experiences and in turn, your client-facing team's experiences? Yeah,
and this is a tough one, because it's really, for us, it's not necessarily sales. I mean, it's always sales, but it's not sales. For us, measuring it was engagement. So the previous learning management software that we were partnering with, our actual numbers, our engagement numbers from our sales teams and our client-facing teams was really low. So it was in the high single digits, low teens. And that was really depressing, because we had put a lot of effort into doing those trainings. So just upping the engagement number and looking at how long are you spending on the training, how often are you doing it, is it a daily activity versus a weekly activity, how often are we going back and retraining you? And so we went from a 2-week onboarding process to a 6 months onboarding process to make things stick. We now do repeat tests and quizzes and gamification scenarios to make sure that when we teach you something and you don't execute it for another 6 months, which may be the case, that you still remember it, that you don't have to redo all of it again. So it's the continuous training that we do over time, that iterative learning process that you guys consulted on us with, that means a lot as well. So for us right now, it's pure engagement, and then it's going to be, okay, has this engagement resulted in higher sales? That's always going to be the next level.
Nice. And I think, I can't see that, oh, there we go, 5 minutes. So if you were given an opportunity to kind of start again, greenfields, because I think a lot of the audience here is kind of at this stage of just going on this kind of digital transformation journey, and also internal systems and processes and better improving the client experience, but also the client-facing team experience. If you were given the opportunity to start again, like where would you, and how would you change what you've done?
I would definitely look at the data sooner. And I think, I mean, I briefly talked about how we went back and looked at the engagement numbers. We should have done that from the get-go. We shouldn't have waited to see, oh, wait, we realize that they're not learning as well, and they're not. We get this comment all the time, and I'm sure many of you heard it, why are we telling the stories 50 different ways? And we get this comment a lot, and when we go back, it's because, well, they have 50 different levels of skills, 50 different levels of knowledge, 50 different ways of executing it, and we weren't training on those items. And even if we were, the engagement level of our training was, like I said, the low teens. So we had to figure out really quickly, well, why is that the case? Is it, and for us, it was the access to it was not easy. It was not an intuitive software to use. It wasn't fun. When we looked at it and I said, okay, would I want to do this training? I was no, because there were 45-minute to an hour recordings. No one wants to hear, you don't want to hear us talking for 45 minutes to an hour, so there's no way I could have forced them to do that, and they weren't digesting the information and they weren't able to repeat it back. There was no way to prove that what we taught them was actually getting repeated back in the field and in front of clients. So I would say that I would definitely have looked at the data a lot sooner. I would have been a lot more hard on our team and our executive team on looking at the vendors that we partnered with. I think that we just went back to traditional, we've partnered with this person for forever, why would we change, it's okay, instead of saying, well, let's challenge this vendor to look at what are the other opportunities out there. And so that's when it was a painful process because it was 6 months of RFPing and looking at different vendors until we decided with MindTickle, but ultimately it was a choice between, we want a partner on the learning side who can help us figure out what is the best way for our sales team and our client-facing teams to learn. Not what is the best way to sell a product. That's something that we can handle. What is the best way for them to learn? And we found that the people at MindTickle, like, they were really good at consulting with us and something very simple like you gotta shorten down the recordings to 7-minute increments because people have ADHD, and so we did that. And then you gotta incorporate different methods of learning. It can't just be videos. It has to be also scripts, and it has to be testing, and it has to be gamification. So we layered all those things in order to increase the take up, and that's changed it a lot.
Nice. Thank you. I just want to give anyone an opportunity to ask Julie a question in the audience. We've got a few hands. Yeah, sure. So the question was, if you are hitting all the people in the sales force up with lots and lots of training.
That they thought they knew.
They thought they knew?
Yeah, because they always know everything, is what I've discovered. Then
sorry, no.
how do you get them to was there pushback, and how do you get them to take? There was actually no pushback. I think they realized early on, oh, we don't know this. We don't know how to do this. Because when you test someone, when you give people a recording, they listen to it, you're like, okay. When you test them and then you look at the scores, you're like, okay, that's a whole nother level of knowledge. And then when you ask them to record a video of themselves and position it back, or have the conversation and record it back and send it out to their managers and partners, et cetera. Oh, that was tough. They had a really hard time with that. And the best feedback I got was, it's so uncomfortable recording myself talking. I said, what do you do? Like, isn't that what you do, is that you talk? So, I mean, it's just pretend like it's another person. Like, it's just so awkward in front of a camera. It's like, put a stuffed animal in front of it, I don't care. So we've done a couple of iterations where they've role played with another person to make it feel more at ease. But I think that it was very obvious very early on that they did not know what they thought they knew. And so we even do a lot of interactive screen share where we ask them to work with technology and work with some of our processes to see if they can do it, because they say, oh, I know how to run this report and I know how to pull this factoid, and they can't do that either. So we do have a very strong sales leadership team. We have a very strong executive team that is adamant about learning, so that's helped. Definitely not getting pushback from the top is really important. But then we've made it fun, so they've had a good time, and there hasn't been any pushback that I've heard of. Maybe they're just scared to tell me. I don't know. But, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think we're out of time, but if you want to come stop by the booth and learn a bit more, please do. Julie's around here for the rest of the day as well if you want to check in with her and ask a couple of questions. There's a research paper that we've released if you want to have a read of that as well, or just feel free to email me directly. So thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.